People have a really hard time understanding this. Emotions might be irrational. People's thoughts might be irrational, but irrational does not mean random. Every irrational thought or feeling or emotion comes from a place. There are certain grand narratives that we have over society that people like to view things through. So if you talk to red pillars, like the collapse of the West is foundationally because men aren't men and women aren't women anymore. If you talk to feminists, they might say that the power structures that have been installed by men, we have a very human thing that we do, which is pattern recognition. And sometimes we project patterns onto the world where there are none. We all learn how important it is to be like unbiased. I don't think that's right. I think that what you have to learn is it's important to acknowledge your biases. You can be biased.
A big moment that I enjoyed from your fresh and fit conversation with the guys was
when Matt Walsh was asked on Joe Rogan.
With the Sneako stuff, I wanted to ask. I watch a lot of your stuff. I enjoyed it tremendously. And I see what you're doing as probably, well, I don't know. I'm curious. I see it as more powerful than I think a lot of society does. I think streaming and streamers are still, I mean, you've got your blue hair right now. It seems perhaps not serious to some people.
To be clear, I did this for charity, okay? I did it for charity, okay? For everybody watching, okay? If you thought I was a loser because I dyed my hair blue, it was to get video games to sick, dying kids in hospitals, okay? So I hope you feel like shit for judging me for it, okay?
I did not know that. That's awesome. Yeah, okay, I think that's great. But the general, you know, you're playing Factorio, you're doing video games, you're having conversations. Sometimes it gets into screaming matches. I see what you're doing as potentially shaving off a chunk of the influence that mainstream NBC or that kind of stuff would have in the political arena and shifting it over to you and your audience. When I've seen your shorts, I have found myself doing what a lot of people do, which is like sometimes repeating your views without even critically thinking about them, I'm embarrassed to say, because you have become, for me, a trusted perspective and tastemaker. I'm curious if you see what you're doing at all like that, or if it's just, you know, this fun thing that you do. It pays the bills. You get to play video games, have interesting conversations.
Yeah, I mean, I've definitely taken a lot more seriously over the past year in terms of feeling like I have some kind of like, I've got a talent for it, I would hope. And I've got like, I think I have like a responsibility, a social one to you know, impart what I feel is important onto the people listening to me. That thing that you talk about is, I'd say it's disappointing, but it's true. At the end of the day, what I'd really want is for people to bite my thought process. I want people to take like my critical analysis and then use that application to approach different things. I don't care if you agree with me or not. I really don't care what your opinions are at all. Just as long as you're critically evaluating them, that's the important thing to me. But realistically, at the end of the day, a lot of people are just going to grab your top level opinion about something and run with it, which, I mean, hey, I think my opinion is better than anybody else's, obviously, because it's my opinion. So I guess I'm not too bothered by that. But yeah, I hope at the end of the day, like, people are capable of disagreeing with each other, disagreeing with me, and then having like a good factual foundation by which to build those disagreements. It's more important than the opinions themselves, I think.
Do you think that, I guess it used to be Twitch, now it's become YouTube streaming. One of the things that I see in there is that it seems like sometimes the structure of the conversations that occur here, where it is, one, your opinions are sometimes broadcast 8-10 hours a day. So your entire thought process is made public, which can sometimes make, if you're in a debate, moving back from a position into which you've dug your heels or someone else has dug their heels, very difficult to do because of the ego blow that it takes. Some of the debates that I've seen have devolved very quickly into what seems like bad faith arguments. And then even worse, the term bad faith gets thrown around as a casual insult rather than like a genuine exploration of, are we both seeking truth? And I do see what you're doing as being a very powerful force for shaping like political narrative going forward. I'm curious if you think that the space of streaming is well set up, not well set up, and if you're aware of some of what those, or agree that some of those structural impediments to like good conversation might be.
I think everything is what you make it. I used to be, I used to think that certain formats favored certain types of ideas, or that certain, even certain like, I guess forms of discourse favored certain types of ideas. Like the talking points would always be in the past. For leftists or liberals or whatever, we'd always say, or progressives, we'd always say, well, explaining, you know, racist power structures and all this, that's very, very, very complicated. And, you know, if the other side just wants to say, you know, minimum wage bad, or you know, totally closed border good, blah, blah, and then make up some dumb reason that it's impossible to fight that type of rhetoric because they can be so simple and they don't care about the facts and blah, 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 blah. And I believe that for a long time, probably for like the last 10 years, or at least from 2016 to 2022, that was kind of like how I felt, that I had to do a lot more work putting together a truthful opinion to counteract what I saw as an unfactual opinion. But I think the reality is that I think people on the left for a long time have thought like, well, we're correct, so we don't really have to do any work in making our stuff presentable because we're right. And, if you disagree, well, you're wrong and you should be chastised for it. And we're going to condescend to you. We're going to make you feel dumb. And I think that approach has just failed to serve, that the left-leaning ideology. I think the right has done a really good job at making their stuff entertaining, making it palatable, making it cool and hip. And they're really good at getting their talking points across in a way that is just so much fun to watch. And I think that people on the left have abdicated that. I'm trying to shift the focus back on that. So rather than using the excuse of like, oh, well, it's so hard to counter their stuff because, a lie gets halfway around the world before the truth's even got its pants on. Rather than having that thought process, I'm usually just thinking like, what are the snappiest, wittiest analogies? What's the quickest way I can make somebody understand a relatively complicated topic? Like, how can I get these ideas to be as digestible as possible? And then if somebody wants to fight me on the substance, well, then we can go back to my home and we can go through the studies and the data and all of that. But in the meantime, I need to make my ideas as presentable as possible so that I can persuade any random person on the street that I feel like I'm correct on an issue.
What do you think you mentioned witty, snappy, what underlies what makes you more persuasive to a person on the street? Because I feel like I have some idea, but I'm curious what you would say the most important things are. And one that you didn't say is not coming across as like other in the other tribe, which I see people do all the time. They draw the battle lines first and then they start trying to persuade. And at that point, it seems like the battle is lost.
Yeah, I think that the first thing you have to do is you have to step inside somebody's bubble and you have to acknowledge their grievance or their complaint. People have a really hard time understanding this. Like emotions might be irrational. People's thoughts might be irrational, but irrational does not mean random. Okay. Every irrational thought or feeling or emotion comes from a place, right? If you believe in a universe with guiding principles, if you believe in causality, then something that is happening is being caused by something else. It might appear random, but randomness, insofar as our emotional states, doesn't exist, right? Even a trauma response that might be irrational was caused by a traumatic event. So the first thing I try to do is like, if you feel like you hate all Hispanic people because they're taking jobs from you or whatever, right? That probably stems from some sort of economic anxiety. There's probably something there because like rich people don't feel this way, right? If you're making $250,000 a year, you're not complaining about people crossing the border, right? Unless you're too into politics. So if there's economic anxiety, I think you have to start with recognizing like, I understand why you feel this way. I understand that there are these problems and these problems are real. Now, I don't think it's for the reason that you say they are, but I understand, what those problems are. And then we can kind of talk around those problems. I think that the mistake that people run into on the left, and there's a huge disconnect, is somebody will make a statement. They'll say something like, they'll say something like Hispanics are stealing our jobs. Or actually, here I'll use a left-leaning example so I don't come off as hyper-partisan, right? Somebody on the left will say something like cops are indiscriminately killing black people, and then somebody on the right will go, no, they're not. The data doesn't support that. Well, the person on the left, they're not really saying cops are indiscriminately killing black people. That's what they're saying. But what's happened is they've seen enough video footage online that is incredibly troubling, and it's causing them to feel a certain type of way about the footage they've seen, right? And, even seeing two videos of, an unarmed black person being killed or whatever, the recent videos of Tyre Nichols. Tyre Nichols. Yeah, Jesus. That's pretty brutal to watch. And watching that is going to cause an emotion that's going to give you a reaction that's going to cause you to feel that way, that black people are being indiscriminately murdered by police officers. Now, that's not true at all. If you look at the data, if you ask a person, like, how many unarmed black people are killed by cops a year, people will usually say, I've heard anywhere from 500 to 10,000 in some conversations. But the reality is it's very, very, very low double digits. It's like 5 to 15. It's a very, very rare event that happens, but it's caught on video and it makes people feel the way. And that's where those thoughts come from. So if you want to talk to somebody that's having those thoughts, you can't just say, well, the data, because what that person is hearing is the thing that you're feeling is wrong. Yeah. Your feeling is incorrect, but it's not incorrect. They really do have that feeling. It's because they have seen those videos. So yeah, you always have to start from a place of like, listen, you're feeling this and I'm acknowledging that, because at the end of the day, everybody just wants their whatever they feel to be acknowledged by another person. It's one of the best feelings ever, right? You have to acknowledge that feeling. And then once you've acknowledged that and you've kind of earned a little bit of trust and that at least you're hearing what they're saying and they feel that you're hearing what they're saying, then from there you can kind of be like, okay, well, how often do you think this actually happens? How many cops are in the United States, right? Like do you really think that there's tons of black people being killed like every day? Wouldn't we be seeing this way more often than like one bad video every few months? If there are hundreds of thousands of cops and, you know, millions of police interactions, you kind of work from there. That's broadly the approach that I try to take.
Sure. I mean, I love that you brought this up. I think you've hooked into something incredibly important, which is, to me, and it sounds like perhaps to you, it seems like politics is downstream from personal experience.
Unfortunately, and I hate that, but yeah, that's true. I'm like, when it comes to like politics, I'm very like autistic. Like, I like, show me like give me the data points and the state. Like if somebody says, oh, would you rather get this car or that car? Like, you know, if as long as I don't care about the style, it's like, okay, well, let's like look at all the fucking numbers. Like that's just the mind that I have. But most people, you're very correct. It's very downstream from like, how do we feel about things? What do we see? And how does that make us feel? And what are the narratives and stories that drive us, basically? Yeah. Sorry, I mean,
no. I mean, this is where my brain goes a lot. Is that I feel so often I'll be in conversation, and what needs to happen is like, I mean, I don't mean this to be demeaning, but like, tell me about your dad. You know, what happened that caused this rupture with your relationship with authority? Or like, tell me about your upbringing. Like, who bullied you or beat you up, and what did they look like? Tell me about the ways that you've been told that you're not enough, and the color of the skin of the people who told you that. And when that is explored, it seems like all of the other stuff, which you mentioned, you know, cops are indiscriminately killing black people, or you could just as easily pick something that cuts in the other direction. Mm-hmm. It seems like the receptivity to doing what you discuss, which is let's look at the data, let's take perhaps a different approach than the one that you think is most necessary, can then be received, because as you sort of mentioned, the foundational thing that I see happening in politics is people want to be seen, understood, and heard. And they are, I think, a little bit embarrassed and ashamed to admit that their experience is as deeply personal as it is, and then they project their personal trauma onto the world and say everyone has to clean up this issue outside in the world, rather than me doing it at a very personal level. Does that match your understanding of politics?
Yeah, 100%, yeah. And even outside of politics, people in general just want to be seen, understood, heard, right? If you're on a first date with somebody, you know, figure out the best questions you can ask them to make them talk about themselves as much as possible, and then vibe off of that, and, you know, like be reflective. Like, these are things that you'll learn on dates. These are things you'll learn from therapists, that therapists do with clients. These are things that police officers use in interrogation rooms to get subjects to open up and talk and talk and talk. These are just life skills that are applied in every area, and there's no reason why they wouldn't be applied politically as well.
Yeah. So you're very interesting to me as a person. I don't mean to butter you up.
Yeah,
you talk about, like, I think jokingly, but you're like, I'm autistic, I'm sociopathic, I'm psychopathic, and then on the flip side of that coin, you seem to have a very deep understanding, or at least sympathetic understanding, of what people want and need in interactions. Is that a function of this analytical mind that you have, or is that an intuitive understanding that you've come to?
So without trying to jerk myself off too much, I don't know if I'm actually like autistic or anything. I feel like growing up, I feel like the way that I processed emotions is a lot different than other people. Like, I have a really hard time understanding certain things. Like, family ties is something I've never understood people that have like mommy daddy issues. I'm pretty separate from my family. There's a lot of things like that I just don't necessarily understand. But I mean, I want to like have friends and have people like me and be able to be social and everything. So I spend like a great deal of time thinking about like social interactions. Like, what are the things that you say that make people feel certain ways? What are people trying to get out of social interactions? What is the exchange that's happening when two people talk? So I guess I've spent like a lot of time deliberately thinking about that. I don't know if that's an autistic thing, or maybe I'm just kind of empathetic and I hide it in a dumb way or something. But yeah, I don't know. I've spent a great deal of time, I think, thinking about certain types of social interactions. Yeah.
Do you, one of the things you talk about empathy in your streams and how you're able to connect with people that have very different backgrounds, worldviews, perspectives than you. Do you experience empathy as a felt sense, or is it more a sympathy where you can imagine yourself being in their shoes, or does it occur to you as like a feeling where you're feeling anxious on behalf of them?
I have to think a lot about it. None of that is built in, I think. Yeah, I don't have very many empathetic responses to things. Usually I have to think a lot. Yeah.
Got it. So like a developed, sophisticated, sympathetic response.
Basically. Yeah.
Very interesting. All right. Well, we can dive into the mommy daddy stuff later. But for now, you mentioned Tyree Nichols. I'm curious if you had a perspective on that isn't, we've heard, and I agree.
I called him Tyre earlier. I need you to edit that out. No, I'm just kidding. Tyree Nichols. Yeah, thank you. I've never actually heard his name said before. I've only read it. So
sure.
Okay. Yeah. Anyway. Yeah. Sorry. What about it?
I did the same thing. So I had to watch it on YouTube before I had an understanding. But was curious. The I think response that I'm hearing from everybody is, obviously this is a horrible thing. I'm curious if you have a perspective other than that is sheds light on this or is interesting.
Yeah, I don't know if it was that bad at all. You know, the guy. No, I'm just kidding. I mean, like, obviously, I'm going to share it's a horrible perspective. The one thing I guess that I guess I kind of jumped into Twitter and thought about this a little bit. There are certain grand narratives that we have over society that people like to view things through. When people have like a pet issue or a certain ideology, they like to feel like their one thing is the solution to everything. So if you talk to red pillars, like the collapse of the West is foundationally because men aren't men and women aren't women anymore. If you talk to feminists, they might say that the power structures that have been installed by men, the patriarchy, are what are, accelerating us towards collapse in the future. That the inherent violence that men like to expel on women and other people, plays out on a geopolitical level. And that's where Putin and all that. If you talk to everybody has like a lens that they view things through, and that's why everything is happening. I don't like the racist lens where every single time something bad happens to a black person, the cops are racist. People look at it like the cops are racist. Well, they're black. Well, they have internalized racism. Like, well, okay, well, where's the evidence that they were being racist at all? Well, it's the police force. It's like, okay, well, was it a racist call or whatever? It's like, well, no. Systemic racism means that the origination of the policing in the United States had racist ties to it, and police officers today across the United States probably have some form of implicit bias, and they participate in racist structures because legislation has made it so that black areas are police points. Like, holy shit. Like when we're at this level of like racial analysis, like every single action that every single person is doing at all points in time become like simultaneously racist and not racist and, sexist. And it's too much. I think at some point we need to be able to take a step back and look at some things and be like, these look like pretty shitty cops. I don't know if one of them had a personal issue. There was that rumor floating that Tyree was with one of the wives of the officers. I think Tyree's family came out and said that's not true. So I don't know if it's something personal or what, but like right now, what I saw on video was a handful of really horrible cops that seemed like they were on a hardcore power trip. They tried to arrest somebody. The guy resisted and ran at first. And for some cops that like flips a switch that is like, oh, you're going to run from me? Well, I'm going to make you regret ever running from me. And they went on a crazy power trip. Now, is it possible that they're racist? Sure. Is it possible that there's going to be some evidence that comes out where they've like been racist and it's like, ooh, that was probably racist? Yeah, for sure. Is there evidence right now that this was a result of white supremacy or anything to do with anti-black racism? Absolutely not. There has not been a shred of evidence provided. So when people jump to these like, it's racist, these cops are racist, it's like, I don't know if you can say that. Like, there are black people that are capable of being shitty to other black people that aren't racist. They're just kind of like shitty people. Same thing with white people, same thing with Hispanic people. Some of them are racist, some of them aren't. Some of them do bad things because they're racist. Some of them just do bad things because they're, shitty people.
Yeah, I watched a video with Piers Morgan, and he had, the typical talking head on one side and the other. And the thing that I thought was interesting is the woman was bringing up that black people can be racist. They can have internalized racism. And they argued about that point. Is it true? And I think what you said sort of underlines like, yes, that is possible, but we see no evidence for that in the simple fact that there was a crime between two people who were black, where the perpetrator and the person who was being victimized were black. You mentioned so many things that I want to touch on in there.
You can always cut me off if I'm rambling. So.
No, this is why we have you. They get to hear plenty of me. What was that as regards to Tyree Nichols? You mentioned the lens is what interests me more than any particular thing. And this is where I guess I come back to what it continues to be my main thesis, which is I watched you watching a feminist breakdown where for one feminist who was disabled, like everything needed to be viewed through the label of her disability. From one feminist who was a black Latina, that was the most critical thing. Yeah. And what is going on here? It seems like people make their own personal experience and try to proselytize it as if it were a religion that everyone ought to participate in, without doing that own work within themselves.
I think that we have a very human thing that we do, which is pattern recognition. And sometimes we project patterns onto the world where there are none. I mean, look at constellations, right? They're not actually pictures in the skies. It's just a bunch of dots that we draw pictures around, right? And we think that that's kind of cute, but that's really how we process the entire world. Arguably on an incredibly subjective level, like even our brain is putting together, you don't actually see what's in front of you. You've got two blind spots in your vision. You've got a ton of blood vessels running through your eyes that you can trick yourself into seeing if you're curious sometime. There's a whole bunch of stuff our mind does to construct the world around us. And yeah, one of those things is pattern recognition. Sometimes people fall into this lens of, as kind of drawing back what I said before, this lens of viewing the world where they view it through either feminism or red pill or Republican or conservative or fascist or communist or whatever. And every single problem, they can find a way to retrofit everything into that particular thing. And it gets to the point to where you can even have, hypothetically a YouTuber, donating millions of dollars to like give people sight because they can't afford surgeries. And somehow that becomes a bad thing because it's just a reminder of the material conditions that we live in that necessitate that Mr. Beast has to donate money just to give people the gift of sight when the government should be giving them that automatically on its own. And it's like, Jesus Christ, like where are we at right now? How are we attacking a guy that just gave millions of dollars to give people surgeries to fix cataracts or to give them sight again? How is this a bad thing, And it's insane.
Where do you, so I spoke to Walsh probably 2 years ago, and we had a bit of a conversation about worker collectives and that sort of thing. Your current thoughts on capitalism, where is it working? This is a big topic. Where is it working? Where is it not working?
It's important to recognize what things are, what they're good at, and what they're bad at. Capitalism is really good because it is incredibly flexible and adaptable, and it can respond so fluidly to so many different situations. People will always, I hear socialists say this a lot, oh, capitalism runs on a boom bust cycle. That's horrible. And it's like, well, that's amazing because it can boom and bust and boom again. Okay. Because there's a lot of central planning economies that just go bust and they never come back. They're destroyed for decades because a centrally planned economy is so much harder to adapt to ever changing conditions than something that's more fluid. So capitalism is really good in that a bunch of people can stand around and go, I can make money there. I'm going to put my dollars there and I'm going to make money doing that. And I can do that really quickly. And that money might be made by providing the best product to a consumer where they can afford clothes or a car and they couldn't have afforded it in the past. And that money might go towards the cheapest and most cost-effective way to dump toxic sludge in a river that's going to, in 10 years, cause a whole bunch of kids in a small city to have 4 eyeballs. Right? So capitalism isn't good or bad. It's just a way of organizing an economy, and I think it does really well at adapting to external market forces and having capital flowing to different things. So with that understanding, you look at the things that capitalism does well, which is allocating capital. You look at the things that capitalism does really poorly, and that's taking into account negative externalities. So these bad events that don't have a dollar price tag attached to them. So things like pollution are a big one. And then you use the government to say like, okay, well, hey, if you're going to pollute, here's cap and trade. Here's a carbon tax. Now it's going to cost you money. Or, hey, here's some regulations. And if you do this thing, you're going to get a big fine. You're going to get in big trouble. We're going to shut your company down. So yeah, that's how I view capitalism, I guess. I think that I'm a very instrumentalist when it comes to all of these things. All of these things are tools to achieve some greater end. No, I don't care about the tool. Nobody should care about the tool. You should care about the greater end, If somebody says, I don't want there to be homeless people, that's good. We shouldn't want there to be homeless people. But the good is attached to relieving homelessness or alleviating homelessness. The good doesn't become attached to the process. If you think that rent control is a good way of alleviating homelessness, then that's cool. But if we find out that rent control sucks, then screw rent control, then get rid of it. But don't become morally attached to the rent control and say, well, if you don't like rent control, you must hate poor people. It's like, no, hold on. We don't care about the rent control. That's just a tool to effect some type of end. And if the end isn't being effected by the tool, then we dump the tool. People become very morally attached to their systems and tools rather than the ends that they're trying to achieve, I think.
When it comes to like to take rent control with homeless people or something, when there is any kind of redistribution, I actually don't know the answer to this. I'm curious if you have a perspective, which is, is it morally right to redistribute wealth from those that have to those that may not? Because one, the system was rigged and the people that don't have it because they were losers in a rigged system. So the way the capitalist economy is structured is such that the bourgeoisie take advantage of the proletariat, whatever, or is the system fair and there will always be, or, obviously it doesn't have to be one of these, it could be on a continuum. Is the system fair? There will always be winners and losers, but it is unethical for anyone to have billions of dollars, even if they earned it by having 8 arms and 12 brains and contributing at a level that was so far beyond someone who is not contributing to the collective. Have you thought about like sort of the moral basis of redistribution within a capitalist society?
Yeah, redistribution, I think, is based on 2 really important concepts. One is life is not fair, okay? How much you achieve and where you end up is oftentimes highly determined by where you were born, who you were born to, the education that you get, a bunch of stuff that you don't have any right to, right? Your parents gave it to you. And the second thing is a concept called marginal utility. I think these are the 2 things that redistribution is built around. So one, people will be born middle class to middle class parents who were born middle class. They'll stay middle class their whole lives and they'll die. And they'll look at a person that was born into a working class family, remains working class, dies working class, and they'll look down on that person. And it's like, why? They did the same shit you did. They started out at level 5 and they ended their life at level 5. You started out at level 10 and you ended your life at level 10, right? If you're going to look down at a working class person for staying working class and coming from working class families, then I mean, like, they should look down on you for being born middle class and not becoming a millionaire. Like, what were you doing? You had every opportunity in the world to become a millionaire, and instead you just got a job as an engineer making $130,000 a year. Like, wow, big deal. How are you going to make fun of the guy making $35,000 a year when you were born and you had like a mommy daddy welfare? You're up until you're 23 years old, paying for your whole school and everything. Not to attack either side, right? Everybody has their struggle. But yeah, I think that where you're born and the situation you're born into, I think are obviously, anybody will admit, like, highly influential on your outcomes. So if that's true, I think that you should probably be willing to help out the people at the bottom a bit if you're a person at the top. That's one. The second thing is a concept called marginal utility. If you offer me $1,000, I'll be grateful, and that's cool, but it's not going to change my life. I don't care. But if you offer a homeless person $1,000, theoretically, it could be life-changing. Marginal utility is, I think it's a concept that comes from economics, but basically, like, the next amount is always going to be, even if the absolute value is the same, the utility granted is going to be a little bit different. Your first $10,000 that you make is going to be a lot different than your next $10,000, right? A person making $50,000 a year, their life is going to change completely going from $50,000 to $100,000 a year. But a person making $1 million a year, their life's not going to change going from $1 million to $1,050,000, right? So if marginal utility is true, then people at the top can afford to lose a bit of money and give it to people at the bottom. Their lives are hardly going to be impacted at all. And the people at the bottom theoretically can have vast improvements based on that redistribution.
Presumably what curbs this is the who earned the money, right? So there's the limit on marginal utility is if we played that out to the extreme, we would eventually all have the same amount of money. And I assume where you would curb that is, this person, be it through gift of their parents, gift of God, whatever, worked, earned, or just fell into this money, and we leave most of it with them for that reason.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not trying to say that, like, I don't think everybody should have the same amount of money. I'm not trying to say that I like my money. I don't want to give it all away, I'm just saying that, like, you shouldn't be so reticent to help people that are in worse positions. Like, not everybody is capable of contributing to society in the same ways that other people are, but I still think that it makes for a better world for everybody. You want everybody to be brought in, or not brought, you want everybody to be bought into the society that you're running. It's just, everything works so much better that way. Have you ever seen the movie School of Rock?
Yeah.
It is a, I don't know if the writers did this intentionally, but Jack Black is a masterclass on leadership in that movie. Do you remember the part where he put together the band?
And he brings them all in their own way, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And there was the little boy who was really sad. He's like, we don't get to be in the band. And then he found unique jobs for every single person. Because having half the class just sitting there watching, they're not going to feel bought into it. But he gave everybody a job. He made all of them feel important. And that's something that a good leader does, right? That could be a supervisor in a restaurant. It could be a mid-level manager in a business. It could be a project lead on a software development team. Like, you have to make everybody feel like they're bought into whatever project they're working on. I'm sure there's got to be a chapter in How to Win Friends and Influence People where Dale Carnegie probably talks about this, right? But it's such an important concept. So so for society, like, I like being wealthy in America because I want to be like wealthy in America because America is a cool country. I don't want to go and be like the king of ashes and like in a destitute, spot where everybody else around me is in poverty. So I think that having people at the top willing to give back to people at the bottom to maintain everything running smoothly and to keep everybody bought in and happy, I think is really important.
Got it. So if you sort of more concretely, where do you land? Because I think that even a lot of right-leaning people would probably agree with a lot of what you said. They don't want to be king of the ashes. They do want to give back. But then when it comes to nuts and bolts, there's, oh no, fuck no. You're not taking
so nuts and bolts, concretely where do I land? So I'm in favor of a progressive tax system. I'm totally okay with that. So again, this is the instrumental part. And a lot of left-leaning people focus on this. I don't think taxes are good. I don't think taxes are bad. Taxes are just a thing that we need to fund the social programs that we want to fund the government, right? So what I think we should do as a government is we need to figure out what social programs do we need? Do we want a form of public option for healthcare? I personally think we should. Do we want to fund more public transit? Do we want to fund, these other types of welfare programs like food stamps or WIC or whatever, all these other things? Find out what we need to fund and then tax on a progressive level appropriately. That should be full stop how the system works. A lot of left-leaning people get hyper fixated on this, like there should be no billionaires or people. I don't care about any of that. I don't care how much money you have. You earn $100 billion. You're Elon Musk. Congratulations. Like I think you should keep the vast majority of your money. But I mean, paying taxes to fund the social programs that we think are essential to running society in a way that has the standard of living acceptable for every person in the United States, I think that should be the goal. Homeless people in the United States is unacceptable. We have too much money here, too much wealth. It's going to San Francisco is insane to be in a coffee shop with 20 people that are all making at least $250,000 a year, and you step outside and there are insane homeless people screaming right outside the coffee shop. That's wild to me. That shouldn't exist in the United States.
So I actually am not really steeped in these politics. Some of the people in California, I live in Los Angeles, believe that it is the receptivity to the homelessness, the extension of programs that exists in place like San Francisco and Los Angeles that create an environment where there is more homelessness. Is that something you push back against? Do you think that that redistribution is something that can solve that problem, or at least most of the homeless problem?
I just moved out of LA. I live over in Miami now.
I also moved out of LA. I mean, it was for that reason. It was, I used to live in Santa Monica, right on the 3rd Street Promenade. And it was, homeless people spitting on my dog, cursing you off, calling you names in the street. It was uncomfortable. And also, I think part of the issue in terms of, you said people bring their own lens, is I am totally cognitively sure that most homeless people are not represented in my experience of that downtown Santa Monica experience. Yet, my personal experience is of mostly mentally challenged and very aggressive homeless that are the ones that make themselves most known in your life when you live in that area. So sure. I try to curb my instinct to be like, this is unsolvable by money, because when I see some of those people, there is not really an amount of money that could be offered to them that would solve that problem.
Course. I think that the first thing is people have to stop viewing other people as being fundamentally different than themselves. Like 99% of humans, we all come from the same soup. We all have the same basic drives. Nobody generally wants to be homeless. Nobody generally wants to be lazy. Nobody generally wants to just leech off the government network. That doesn't make most people feel good. So we start from there. For a lot of homeless people, we need to, it's not just a matter of throwing money at them, because just throwing money at problems doesn't always fix it. You need like good, streamlined ways of solving issues relating to homelessness. So if a person is homeless, they probably need a place to stay before they can get the rest of their life together. So getting them some kind of house where they can shower and have like a base of operations before getting them into work, rehabilitating them in other ways. Like, I think that those types of stuff, figuring out like, how can we apply our money in a way that is positive, is better than just throwing money at things. And then the second part of that, because I know a lot of people are probably get really angry when I said everybody's fundamentally the same. Like, no, you don't understand these fucking homeless people. It is true that for homeless people, there is a special side thing where a lot of them have extreme forms of mental illness. Well, I shouldn't say a lot, but definitely the ones you'd notice.
Yeah.
Anybody that has lived outside of a fucking suburb, because a lot of these people on the left will say, oh no, homeless people are just our unhoused neighbors and blah, blah, blah. If you've walked down any street in a major city in the United States, in Miami, in Austin, in Seattle, New York, LA, you will have like the guy that is like, you're sitting at a crosswalk and it's like, I'm going to kill you. And you're like, holy shit. And it's just a guy that just walks by you. Like,
he doesn't even stop.
Yeah. Okay. Oh, just a homeless guy. These people need some sort of like, they have to be housed somewhere. You either in some type of like permanent mental health facility, or there has to be something, because obviously these people are probably never going to be like, oh, I can just work a normal job. Like, you have to have special jobs for them. You've got to have special places with like psychiatric care available to them. But yeah, that again, that needs like a process. It's not just a matter of throwing money at things, which I think sometimes we do. That was one of the things that a lot of people will call me a hypocrite. It's like, oh, you moved to Florida with no income tax, and you left California with high income tax, blah, blah, blah. That is partially true. However, the reason why I don't like the taxes in California is because I don't know where the fuck my money goes. Yeah. I don't know what I was getting for my tax in California, because god damn, you get taxed a lot there. But the city is insane. The streets are broken everywhere. On my little Focus RS, I'm scraping my bumper coming out of every gas station. There's homeless people all over the place. Everything is like, I don't know if the schools absorb all the tax money or what, but like if I lived in Stockholm or Paris or London or these places with like these grand, expansive public transit systems with all of these services where you get your healthcare and shit paid for, yeah, fuck it, I'll pay 50% taxes. But man, I'm living in California paying an effective tax rate, I think, of almost like 42%. Yeah. That's insane. I live in the United States of America. I thought we were supposed to have low taxes here. What's going on? That just drove me crazy. But yeah, just refocusing. It can't just be throwing money at problems. It has to be throwing money at good solutions to problems. Just money isn't going to fix anything.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I relate to the California thing. I think what California gets by on is the fact that there's like 200 plus days of sun. And so whenever I look at my tax bill, I go, this is not going to the government. This is the price that they can charge me for the sunshine. Yeah, I mean, they just happen to own this piece of land and they're taxing me for the sun that I receive. But I feel similarly. It's like I can't see where it's going, and I hope that it's going to useful places, but I don't know that it is. And it also sounds like you would be in favor of, which I feel like most people should get behind this, the idea of small experimental government programs, which is rather than roll out instantaneously a multi-billion-dollar thing to solve homelessness, to break that, to apportion that into smaller approaches, where one might be like, weekly mental health checkups. One might be free housing. They might include different things, because it sounds like we don't know how to solve the problem of homelessness, and just chucking money to the first idea or, some expert's idea of what's going to work seems to not have been very effective, versus if we took a more scientific approach to it and ran a bunch of experiments, we might be able to start small and then scale a solution.
Yeah. I don't think the political will is there. I mean, homeless people aren't voters. We don't really care about them politically because they're not, influencing any electoral outcomes. People in cities are affected, but I mean, these are probably people that largely live in apartments maybe, and they don't vote as much as like suburban people who don't deal with homeless people. That's like my guess. Usually when a problem isn't getting solved, most people immediately go to like lobbyists and political influence or whatever. Usually what I try to think of is like, well, who's voting? And I feel like that actually will get you an answer more closely for why a problem is or isn't getting solved, right?
Sure.
When you look at like police forcing, like police issues don't get solved because capitalist companies are paying off the politicians to maintain the defenders of capital and blah, blah, blah. And it's like, well, I think, who's more likely to vote, right? Poor, disenfranchised minorities that are being negatively impacted by cops, or affluent, white, older voters who probably never see cops in their life except to say hi to like their friendly police officer on the street, right? These people aren't voting to defund the police or get rid of them. These people are scared of the other people that are being negatively impacted by the police, right? So it's obvious like which way the policies are going to go. Just look at the voting base. You don't need like lobbyists or crazy conspiracies to figure out why the things aren't changing the way you want them to. Especially with only like a 20 or 30% voter turnout in a lot of cities, which is where your mayor who nominates your chief of police and everything comes from.
So I have never voted. I'm fairly politically disengaged, though. Just like every red-blooded American, I argue about it heatedly at the dinner table. Sure. Is that the way that I've looked at it? Is for a couple of excuses that I'm sure you've heard before. One, I live in California. In terms of the presidential election, not likely to break, though there was a mayoral election that was very, very tight in Los Angeles that might actually have local effect. Two, when I've zoomed out and asked how can I spend my time, it feels like there's so much mud thrown into the political arena, where it's like there are so many forces acting against my understanding of who these candidates are, what they're going to do, and what the outcomes will be, that the amount of time required for me to form a solidly based opinion, to choose between A or B, seems not insurmountable, seems like a poor use of time compared to what else I might do that could otherwise positively impact my community from the private sector or just from being a good brother, friend, son, etc. And I'm curious if you find that sufficient to morally exempt myself from voting, or if you say, no, that's not enough.
I mean, I think we should vote. I think it's good to vote. You want to see how many people are voting. It's like, I think it's good because it helps us understand where the country's at for things. So like, here's something I'm thinking of. I'm trying to look this up real quick. But like, one issue that Democrats face right now is we're fighting against a lot of systemic stuff that is, I don't want to say it's undemocratic, but it hurts the representation. No, hold on. How should I say this? There are systems in place in the United States that favor a smaller number of voters in some areas versus others. So two big examples of this are the Senate, which I support. I think it's okay for states to have representation. But man, when a citizen in Wyoming has 2 senators and a citizen in California that is like 50 times the population has 2 senators, that's pretty wild. But then 2, it also comes out in the Electoral College, where we also have like a wildly disproportionate representation of how powerful is your single vote. But I think it's important to say because, I fought with a lot of Trump people that will argue this, well, Trump won the election, Like, sure, but Hillary Clinton got 3 million more votes, right? Trump might have won the election, but don't pretend like he was the most popular president in the United States of America. That's not true. So I think that every vote matters. I think it's important to be able to look at like where the, popular will is. I mean, I'm not going to lie to you. If you're in California, your vote's never deciding an important presidential election or something, but like your down ballot votes, I think can be important. And it's good to just see like nationally, even if you don't feel like you're going to swing a state. I mean, you've got third party votes, or if you get them up to, 5% of the states, election total. I think they can get some type of funding to get on balance this year. There's other stuff there. And voting is just like kind of like, it's the most important thing arguably that you can do in a democratic republic, because you want to, having your citizens choose the leaders is a great responsibility.
How do people educate? Yeah. So in terms of the
education, here's the one ask that I make of people. Sometimes I think people want like the golden bullet, like, okay, well, listen, 2 articles a day from the Wall Street Journal, 3, on the ground reportings from Reuters, and maybe 1 from the Associated Press, and then do 1 from Fox News, 1 from CNN, and then you're like, yeah, fuck all that. You don't know all that shit. And also there's no like magical, bullet there. One of the issues we have today is a lot of people say that it's really difficult to find out where to consume good media. I don't agree with that. I think it's pretty easy. The problem that people are actually running into is we're used to passively consuming media. And passively consuming media means that we see the headlines coming across our social media feeds, and then we run with those headlines and then with the pundits that interpret those for us. If you just read a full article about whatever headline you've read, you will be more informed than 98% of the voting population. Even if you fucking read shit like Breitbart or Fox News or, New York Times, whatever you read, just don't read just the headline. Just read the full article. Articles today are written to be read in like 4 to 6 minutes. They're usually like 6 paragraphs. These are like shorter than most of your high school English writing assignments. They can be read very quickly. Just read the full article. And as long as you're doing that, you're getting way more information and context than 99% of people. Even if you read from media sources that I personally don't think are the greatest, you'll still be more informed. So if you're trying to get into it and you feel like really overwhelmed by everything, just like stop and just read an article for 4 to 6 minutes. If you do that, you will find that you have so much more information than you ever believed possible by just reading a 5-minute article. There were so many people I debated about the Kyle Rittenhouse stuff who would just say the wildest things about,
I watched this was mind-bending to watch some of the conversations that you had about Rittenhouse.
Yeah, how many people are like, oh yeah, well, I mean, he's a white supremacist. He killed 2 black kids for no reason. I was like, none of the people killed were black. The stuff that started, I had a debate with Sam Cedar over this, where the stuff that started off was over the killing of Jacob Blake, right? The guy that got shot in the back 6 times by cops. That wasn't a killing. He's not even dead. But a lot of people think he is. If you say like, oh, remember the Jacob Blake shooting? Yeah. And Sam Cedar even started the conversation off saying, oh yeah, that guy that got killed by the cops. He didn't get killed. He's paralyzed, but he's not dead. Just read the articles. Read the full articles that they come out. And don't trust 15-second video clips. I would never trust a 15-second video clip. If somebody's showing you a 15-second video clip, that is a highly edited, highly sensitive. And I don't care if we're talking about cops killing somebody. I don't care if we're talking about Andrew Tate being misogynistic. I don't care if you're talking about a Destiny clip with something that I've said. 15-second video clips are highly sus. Try to just see the greater conversation where they came from. Find the original video. Watch like a minute before, a minute after. Yeah. Generally, when I advocate for media literacy, I'm just saying just read a little bit more. There's not going to be like a golden bullet, like that's going to give you all the good information. Very rarely will anybody lie. Almost nobody lies outright in the media. Usually they just tell you selective pieces of information. And if you read it all, you'll kind of get a feel for like what's not being said.
Yeah. One of the reasons that and I think that was all, would benefit a lot of people a lot. One of the reasons that I don't do that is because I feel like when I watch the news, there is a selection bias. Like I'm going to be told about policing in America and not the war in fucking Africa. I'm going to be told what is important, and then there's a tremendous amount of how to think about that as well. Like if the race of the police officer is included, if Andrew Tate is listed as misogynist influencer Andrew Tate. Like a lot of the secret thinking and interpreting is being done for me. So I've even, not rightly necessarily, just from my own perspective of liking philosophy, I think more than politics, have tried to step back and read books, the stuff that has been around for a long time to form general ideas, but to truly not know the specifics of who I ought to vote for, what is correct in this particular case with Jacob Blake, because it does seem like when most people engage, and I'm not saying this is what you're doing, and perhaps this is your frustration with other people, is there's just ego games that are being played in this political arena where it's like, oh, you didn't know. And it's particularly, I think that streaming falls victim to this, which is it really is, from my eyes, a lot of the debates become who can look tougher, who can win the debate with some sort of an ego game. And I have sensed your frustration with that at times. Just the person who often is, does want to read the article or is adjusting their opinion over time. And I've just sort of elected to not play the political game, except to view it from a meta level of like, what does this tell me about who this person is and what their issue is with their mom or dad? It's where I often land.
I think for a lot of, when it comes to ego stuff, so here, like when you're growing up, we all learn how important it is to be like unbiased. I don't think that's right. I think that what you have to learn is it's important to acknowledge your biases. You can be biased. You should be biased. I am biased in favor of my wife. If she tells me something, I'm probably going to believe her over a stranger because it's my wife, right? I'm biased against certain types of people in the media because I know they've told lies before. I know I'm if James O'Keefe and Project Veritas come on the video, right? I'm probably not going to trust that initially, right? When you're doing homework, the important thing is not to go, okay, I'm going to be unbiased. It's to acknowledge your biases. Sometimes when I do research on stream, I've done this before in the past where, especially over a lot of vaccine related stuff, I was going to put on a Joe Rogan podcast. I'm going to put on a Joe Rogan podcast. And I write at the top of my notepad, okay, we're going to listen for claims. We're going to write down stuff. We're going to research. And I write right at the very top, I do not like Joe Rogan. The reason why it's important for me, well, I don't like his takes. I think he's a cool guy, but I don't like a lot of his takes. I don't like vaccine stuff. But the reason why it's important for me to write that is because I need to understand that I am predisposed towards him saying something and me outright disagreeing with it, even for no good reason. Whenever you're going to start listening to something or you're going to start reading something, reviewing something, you need to be aware of these biases so they don't poison your ability to understand the material. I have to know for myself that as I go through this, I don't like Joe Rogan, okay? That doesn't mean that every single thing Joe says is wrong, though, okay? He might say some things that are factually correct. You cannot let your personal dislike of somebody taint your ability to understand what are otherwise rational and reasonable arguments. There might be a chance that Joe is going to bring up something that we haven't heard before, or that new evidence has come to light that shows that it might be effective. So I have to be aware of these two things so that when stuff comes up, I don't just let my mind automatically go to, oh, Joe said that he's wrong. No matter what they say in the video, these two prevailing biases are going to carry us through the entire video. The most important part of watching anything is to be aware of our biases, okay? There are two different aspects to an argument that make the conclusion true, right? I might find myself in the middle of a podcast with Joe Rogan saying things like, oh yeah, I think sometimes, 1 + 1 = 2. And I'm like, that's not true. It doesn't always, non-Euclidean geometry, maybe. And it's like, at some point in the stomach, I was like, oh, hold on. Are you disagreeing with this guy just because you don't like him? Or do you actually have like some merit to the disagreement? Because there are people that say things that are really, that they say a lot of dumb shit, but sometimes they say stuff that's true. And yeah, you just got to be really careful about that. So yeah, I think it's important to acknowledge the biases you have. And then when you are doing research, doing homework, reading articles, just be aware like, okay, I don't like this Trump guy. I don't like this Biden dude. And when he says something, I might be a little bit more poisoned against that statement than I would be otherwise. So I need to be extra careful not to fall into all of the little mental pitfalls that are, that lay before me when analyzing this person's speech.
Sure. One of the, you mentioned unconscious bias, and I went to thinking, because I hear that in terms of race. I think one of the things that is tough to do that I've tried to catch is when people are talking, I think that some people, myself included, can have an intuitive sense that they are not following, but not be able necessarily to accurately determine where or why the jump in logic is occurring from that other person. And so this is actually something that occurred with me with unconscious bias. I when I would listen to that stuff, I was like, this isn't sounding right to me. And where I landed was, oh, there is a tremendous amount of unconscious bias. I mean, I carry unconscious bias about everything, race included, gender orientation included, all of those are in there. But to reduce unconscious bias or to elevate those, 3 pillars to the most important unconscious biases I have is not true for me. And I know that from exploring some of my biases, which is I have far deeper biases against all different things than that. So I don't know, that just came to me as you were discussing unconscious bias. I don't know if you have a reaction to it, not that you need to.
Yeah, that's the whole other trip of my life. I did a lot of drugs.
I want to talk about that. Me too.
Oh yeah, sure.
That's where this exploration came from.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Well, same here. Yeah. I used to think, when I'm prior to doing way too many mushrooms, if you would have asked me, I would have said that like 95% of your thoughts are pretty much kind of in your control. And you've got 5% is underneath this underlying like mood or vibe that's influencing your thoughts. You got to be really careful that you don't let that 5% throw off the other 95% because that'll mess you up real bad. And then after doing a lot of drugs, I almost completely flipped that where I'm like, I think like 10 to 20% of your thoughts maybe are like in your control. And you've got like 80 to 90% of this mood underneath that you need to be hyper cognizant of because it can hijack your entire cognitive system before you even realize you've had a thought and poison you against something. So yeah, but that's it goes off into a different area. But yeah, I think it's really important.
Let's go off in that direction. Sure. So it's for me, so I've also done psilocybin. I've done some MDMA. I've always done it in pretty regulated environments, often with like a therapist guiding.
Okay.
And I'll give you just an example. I have this podcast. I'll sometimes talk about politics, but usually from a sort of a meta perspective, like I said, because I don't know how to engage with the specifics of it. But I have this thing about the New York Times, and I can always point to this story was fucked up or this thing was fucked up. And in one of the trips that I did, it came to me that My fucking the root of this, why I am predisposed to have an issue with them, is that my dad, I remember, would always listen to the New York Times and not to me. And it fucking pissed me off. So I remember I told him about Jordan Peterson 3-4 years prior to the New York Times running an article, and that guy was just a kook. And then he shows up in the New York Times, and all of a sudden, I got to check this guy Jordan Peterson out. So seeing that process play out for myself so many times, where I feel like I have these intellectually, rationally grounded perspectives and values about what is important and what needs to be paid attention to, only to have it revealed that these are highly personal things relating to my past desire to be loved and accepted inside my family and inside my group of friends, was highly influential to me. And I'm curious, because I watched a video where I think you did like 10.5 grams of mushrooms or something insane.
Yeah, it was really stupid, yeah.
Oh my God. Have you unlocked those sorts of knowings in yourself? Do you understand why you are the way that you are from those sorts of things? I'd love to just like open that conversation up.
Yeah, unfortunately, most of those are like kind of personal revelations of like life and things that I care about in terms of like having other people that I love near me. It's not very intellectual. I get really lucky for the intellectual stuff. I took when I was in high school, I took an AP psychology class. And that class was probably one of the most important classes I've ever taken in my life, because basically it was just chapter after chapter after chapter of these are the reasons why you cannot trust anything that you believe, because you are loaded with so many cognitive biases. And we watched so many good videos. We went over the Milgram experiment, the Stanford
Arthur
prison
Ashe
experiment.
one is great too. We got to rerun
Ashe
that.
line test and everything.
We did that. We reran that. I mean, so many of these experiments you can't rerun nowadays. We did that, and it worked every time. In a high school, oh my God, it was insane.
And
so the Ashe one,
if
for
it's
people
like,
who don't know, I'll just quick tell,
yeah.
is there's this thing, it's like an optical illusion where there's two lines. There's A and B, and they are the same exact length. And you sit a bunch of people in a row, and you have them publicly say which line is longer. And the first three people are plants, and so they say A. And the fourth person is the one you're doing the experiment on to see if they'll cave to that social pressure. And they did in our high school every time, which was
the really fascinating thing about that experiment was people cave when they have to stand up and answer. When asked to write answers privately, and they didn't reveal it to the rest of the class, they still caved.
Ooh, we didn't do that.
Still caved.
Fascinating.
And that was with private answers. Yeah. So, and now
it actually affects what they believe is what that seems to imply. It's not just I'm trying to fit in. It's I am so deeply trying to fit in that I can trick myself about what I am seeing, which is, I mean, that has
maybe either trick yourself or the societal pressure is so big, even if people can't judge you, you're still judging yourself. Yeah, I don't know which one it is there, but it could be both. But it over something so simple as like a line, like whether one is taller or shorter, like if it impacts us that much there, imagine on more complicated social dynamics, how much we're being influenced and pressured by people around us. So I try to be really careful. I try to be aware that I have a ton of biases. I'm going to hear things that I want to hear. I'm going to remember things I'm going to want to remember. I'm going to discount people that I want to discount. I'm going to be really egotistical or arrogant about my own beliefs. I try to be fair to myself too. Like if I'm arguing with somebody and they're proving me wrong on something, like it's very rare that I'm going to change my mind in the moment. That's incredibly rare. I don't expect anybody to do that. I don't expect anybody I debate to do that. I don't expect anybody ever to do that. But I'll try to like reflect on conversations I feel like didn't go very well over the next few days, because I'll have some distance temporally from the conversation. So I can kind of rethink about things. I'm not as emotionally invested. And then I can kind of like change up based on how I feel like the conversation went. Do I need to change my opinion? Do I need to argue about something better? But
that's been hugely important learning for me, just to hop on that, was there's moments in conversation where I feel if I push harder, the other person is going to build a fortress around what they believe. And if I just stop here and they are not forced to dig in, we walk away and come back, their position can magically transform without them having to do the ego work of acknowledging that, I had attached to this idea and then had to detach from it. So cutting persuasive conversation shorter than I used to has weirdly enough been a very effective way to be influential, as opposed to making them carve out their place and then assailing it, in which case they're not going to move at all.
Yeah, for sure. And that's a hard thing to do, especially as a public figure, because your audience wants you to crucify somebody every single time. But oftentimes it's not the most effective way to get them to change their mind on an issue. You want to give them a little bit of space to breathe and a little space to grow. I think that one of the benefits I have with a lot of people I talk to is I want to foster this feeling that I'm kind of like a safe landing pad to try out new ideas. Like if I'm having an argument with you, or if we disagree on something, you're like, well, okay, maybe this idea isn't the worst. I'm not going to jump in and be like, I told you, you idiot. This is why, blah, 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 blah. Like, I'm not going to judge you for it. Like, if you're going to entertain anything that I'm saying, I'm going to be really excited and happy about it. And I'll try to find a way to make it work kind of in your world, you know? Yeah, I can't think of an example. Maybe I'm arguing with you about minimum wage. I don't want you to, it's like, oh, well, maybe minimum wage, I think it's bad for businesses. It's like, okay, but like, hey, maybe you're racist, higher minimum wage means Hispanics are probably less likely to get hired, and illegal immigrants aren't going to get hired if we enforce that minimum wage really hard. So it kind of favors like native workers. Don't you like that a little bit, right? Like, you're trying to like work with them, and everyone's like, oh, okay, I guess maybe this is okay. Try to be like, you always want to be like a safe place for a person to explore ideas and not have the feeling that you're going to jump down their throat or do a big like, I told you so, if you end up being correct on something,
For sure. So I want to go back for a moment, and if it's all too personal, you don't have to the your experience with psilocybin, what you took from it. And to me, it is interesting. I don't know if you feel uncomfortable, but like you're a dad, you've got, I believe it's a wife, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so you've got a wife. Yeah. It is a wife. Sorry, that's a funny way of phrasing that. So you've got a wife, you're a dad. I'm curious what psilocybin has done for you, if it's affected those relationships or any of your other personal relationships. I think that stuff is truly more interesting to me than politics. So
yeah, sure. There's a big like 90-degree offshoot right we're talking about. I am a very independent person. I'm a very internally driven person. I don't need a lot of social validation to do what I do. It's been one of the things that's kind of helped me guide me through a lot of the streaming process, because I can deal with a lot of hate online, and generally I'm not as affected as most people. And then I'm also like an independent person in real life. I don't need a lot of like other people driving me. I'm very internally driven. If I want to do something, I'll do it because I want to do it. I don't care what other people think about it generally. I thought that kind of that was like the master of my thought process, existence, or whatever. When I did a whole bunch of mushrooms, I think typically most people, once you get past 5 grams, you're dissolving a lot of these very fundamental processes that all kind of come together to make your conscious experience. And when you start to tear a lot of those back, and you are kind of like left seeing, what's remaining. You're not keeping track of time very well. You start to dissolve this sense of self, which is hard to even explain. You start losing track of your own thoughts. You start to lose track of a lot of memories. A lot of people refer to parts of this, depending on how far you go, as like ego death. Once you start to make this journey into here, you get a lot of interesting thoughts that you wouldn't otherwise. And you get a lot of interesting perspectives that you wouldn't otherwise. One of the things that I kind of took away from it is, when I came in, obviously I fought it a lot because it was my first trip ever, which was super stupid. And I was not ready for how intense it was. I thought it was going to be like smoking weed. Yeah. But one of the things I found out was that it was a really horrifying, awful experience to me, because I felt like I'd broken through to the real reality, that like reality is actually just me sitting here on a couch alone in the middle of the universe with no sense of self and no other people, and it's the worst thing in the world. And I wish that I could like take another drug to go back to. I'd rather fool myself into believing that other reality is true than wherever the fuck I'm at right now, because this is lonely and horrible. So I learned one thing immediately. The immediate thing I learned was that not all truth is good. I think that it might actually be the case that even truth is instrumental, and that truth is only good so long as I can utilize it to make my life better. There might be some true things I could learn that I actually wouldn't want to learn. I'd rather be deceived. And in that sense, if that was the true reality, me being insane as a god in a universe somewhere with no other person to talk to, I'd rather just be like a normal person in this universe is way, way, way better. That was the first thing I learned. And then something that I learned on another trip, which is a long story, but we accidentally took way too many mushrooms again, but I was more prepared for it that time. The second thing I learned was that the reason why that was so horrifying, to be alone in some crazy universe somewhere where everything was like very fucked and different and boring and horrible, was actually because I would have been totally alone. And the idea of like speaking to another person and they're all just constructs of my mind, and the idea of being truly in a place where I can't talk to another like sentient being, like that felt really horrible to me. So I learned that I guess like other people are actually very important to my existence. Even if I am kind of a loner, like having at least a few friends to talk to, or other people to bounce ideas off of, or other unique minds to connect with, to have a presence in my life, is probably the most important thing to me. I don't think I could live on a planet with no other people, even if I had every other amenity available to me. So yeah.
No, I find that stuff super, super interesting. I relate to some of the ways that you've described your upbringing, which is like you played a lot of JRPGs, you got good at reading because of that. I remember I played StarCraft. You were, I beat the campaign on normal. I was not, not anything to be impressed with.
You beat the campaign, okay.
Yeah. I did bitch out in the last fight against the Overlord. I got to be honest. I got the Overmind rather.
Wow.
But, some of the things that we were saying, I wanted to ask, because you're talking about like connecting with minds. One of the things that has recently come to me through mushrooms is it sounds cheesy, but like a felt sense of myself as being more heart-based than head-based. And I'm curious if that has been an experience that you have had through, getting older or any of these trips, or if it has been more logical thought sphere.
I'm still pretty mind-based, but the heart part is a lot more important than I thought it was, I guess. Yeah.
Got it. Well, I hope you continue to do it because it's been super valuable for me. Do you have any sort of like practice around it or anything like that? Or is it just, when you're with friends and it makes itself available?
What do you mean by practice? Like being in like a therapeutic setting or?
Like I will take a
microdose.
I will microdose once a week or something like that and sit in the sun and meditate or something like that. Or I'll do a breath work.
As much as I talk about it, I really haven't done it. I'd say I've probably had less than 20 experiences in my life of like mushrooms and LSD. Maybe 20 or 30 if you include MDMA. So it's not like I'm doing it like all the time. But my experiences so far have been fun.
Cool.
After my first big one, I had to take like a year break from doing anything because it took me like a full year to get back to normal. To go from never having, because when I smoked weed before, weed wasn't even really psychedelic to me before mushrooms. It just kind of like made me like goofy and giggly or whatever. Mm-hmm. And at 30 years old, to make it that far through my life, to do a full-on insane ego death trip worth of mushrooms, like totally broke my fucking mind for a solid 12 months. Like I had a lot of problems. I had death anxiety. I got weird mini like micro bouts of like depression and GAD, like these mental issues I've never had in my entire life before. I developed panic attacks at random. I've never had a panic attack in my life. I haven't, thank God, for like 3 years. But up to 30, I'd never had a panic attack in my life. Even through highly stressful, I don't even know what it was like. And then I just started randomly getting them. So it took a long time for my mind to like recongeal and settle and come back together, because that's a really dramatic thing to experience, not even knowing that whole world exists. I can't believe there are a lot of people that don't know that like psychedelic experiences exist when it's like such a crazy thing that is right there. You just need to like eat a mushroom to get there,
Well, yeah, hopefully not 10.5 grams, because I mean, no wonder. I mean, that would have put me off of it forever.
First try, I would recommend 2 for people, because sometimes people listen, just to be responsible. 2 grams is a really good way to just like ease into it. You might not have a trip, but you'll definitely see and feel things. 2 is good. And then 3.5 for like a full trip is like really good. An eighth of an ounce, I think, is,
Mm-hmm. And setting, of course, which is like who are you with? I've been fortunate enough to do it with professionals, but like, are you with friends that you trust? Are these friends going to fuck with you if you start to see, like that's kind of an important thing, because if you're not, is there someone there who you trust that will not fuck with you, that will take care of you if you're feeling scared, or at the very least reassure you that it's going to be okay? That can have a very, very positive or negative impact if it's not handled in the right way. So, there's your PSA. One of the things that I wanted to ask about, and of course I could go on mushrooms forever, but I mentioned your son. How old is your son right now?
11 years old.
11. So he's getting to that age, and now we can take it back to everybody. He's getting to that age where like girls might start to become a thing. Sorry.
Wait, there's all sorts of weird, dude. We had a thing recently. I didn't even know what the answer was, and I'm like the internet guy, and it was so weird. So we found out. I'll do this for this podcast, but I really need to think like how much do I want to share about my son's life online, because he's like an adult. He's not an adult. He's getting to a real person. It's kind of weird to share, but like basically the abbreviated version was he was having conversations with a girl online, and they were getting pretty personal. And my thing, especially as like a little e-celeb, is like we got to make sure you're not getting catfished. And I had no idea how to tell him how to figure that out, because for me, if a girl messages me, my first question is like, okay, hold on, how old are you? Because if you're under 18, we're not talking. Okay, number 1 is how old are you? And the second is like, okay, well, I need to make sure you're a real person. I need like a picture of you, or I need to see like an Instagram history. Like I need to see that you're like a real life person. You're not like a random dude trying to like do weird stuff with me or whatever. But for like 11-year-olds, you can't really do that. They don't have Instagrams. Asking for pictures of people is kind of weird. I still don't have the solution. I don't know what the answer to that was. I just told Nathan that, your mom might go through your phone sometimes. She might ask me questions. She might go through stuff to figure out what's going on. But like, be careful. Don't send anything you don't want on the internet, because you don't know what's going to happen. The navigating those things today as a person is really difficult. And then I think back to my childhood, and because I'm a guy or because I'm autistic, maybe it didn't matter as much. I talked to hella pedophiles on the internet when I was growing up. But it was just like funny for me. But like, I remember having like phone sex with a woman that was like 35 years old when I think I was like 14. And I thought at the time, it was really cool. And I was like, retrospectively, probably not the best thing, probably not good. But yeah, I'm like, damn, back then I didn't care. But Yeah, the internet's a scary world, and you either like develop this intuitive sense of like how to navigate in a safe way, or you make like mistakes that maybe ruin the rest of your life. I guess I don't know, but
do you? So I don't. It sounds like no. Do you think that had any sort of adverse effect on you, like the 14-year-old talking to a 35-year-old on the phone?
I mean, I'm sure it probably did. I'm sure it all. Yeah, the person I developed. I think that my life has been like falling into better things, like. Well, it was falling into really bad things and then falling into really good things. I got really lucky in like my development, I guess. Like I grew up where my parents were very busy, so maybe I was like a little bit neglected. But like as a result of that, I got to play lots of games. Nobody bothered with me. I grew up very independent. I didn't need my parents to come to my band concerts or whatever because I played music because I enjoyed it. I was very self-driven. I got a lot of like technology experience. Like I was able to figure out streaming very early on because of how much I knew about like software and stuff. So all of it kind of worked out in the end for me because of where I was. But I mean, I guess if streaming wouldn't have existed and I would have been stuck carpet cleaning, I'd probably be giving you the opposite story right now that my life sucked. And
it all turned from that 14-year-old phone sex. Yeah, that was the day that it went south. Well, okay. So it just occurred to me while you're saying that, we don't have to go deep into this, but the experience of loneliness that you had on psilocybin, I connect everything to parents, but that's sort of how you might have described your childhood, as being sort of separate and not having those human connections and leaning into games.
I had human connections, just not family ones. I had because I made friends online and stuff that were important to me. So I don't think I've never felt like lonely. I have like a very narrow or a very limited social circle. Like I don't need to share a lot with people just because that's the kind of person I am. But they're there if I need to. And there are some people. I'm never truly alone. I don't think I could exist truly alone. I would go, I'll tell you about like how, I'm like a lone wolf and blah, 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 blah. But like since the age of 17, I've been in relationships my whole life. I don't think I've been single for more than like a month or two. So like obviously like having at least one person in my life is pretty important to me, I guess, going by my track record. So. Got
it. So let's take that. Your son, what do you, one, I mean, what you're making me realize is that I think this is the plight of every parent, which is, you were just like not prepared to teach your kid about the world that they're coming into, because it wasn't the world that you grew up in, where you're 11 years old and having to worry about like, is this a catfish? The phrase didn't even exist. Generally speaking, not necessarily 11, 16, 17, 18 as well. What do you advise young men? And well, this is two questions. You mentioned that the red pill guys think that the fall of Western civilization is because women have somethinged. Do you think that we're at all a special moment in male-female relationships, or are they always kind of fraught and consent has always been unclear, or have things devolved in any sort of way?
I mean, I think every moment in our lives always feels like the most important moment in history, right? And it probably continues to be true. I'm sure there are some unique things. Yeah, I mean, I'm sure there are some unique things that are existing now, like the internet, but there's always been special problems presented to people. Yeah, I don't think I have any.
Yeah, nothing. It's not a unique. My instinct is, yeah, I look around the world. My initial reaction is, oh my God, misogyny is the worst thing in the, these male-female relations are completely fraying and it could be the end. And I actually have a friend who was writing a book called Mating Crisis, which takes not that hyperbolic of a belief, but the belief that the declining birth rate is a serious problem in these advanced nations, and it's occurring for all of these sorts of reasons. But I tend to agree with you in that everything feels more intense than it is, right? It's always the worst moment in human history, and then you look back at World War II, kind of sucked more. Yeah. So, so what is going on with this consent thing? I don't know. You saw the Atrioc story that sort of came out. Yeah, so, okay. There were a couple things. I very much can sympathize, I suppose, with the women who have, I can't empathize because that I don't know what that would even be like, but it would fucking suck to have those images of you, to receive them, to have them sent to your family, etc. Some of the takes I thought were a little underdeveloped. So for instance, Pokimane was like, don't sexualize people without their consent. And it seems like sexualization primarily occurs in the perception of someone, so I don't know how that would happen without thought policing. I'm curious if you've thought of this, like what the hell do we do with deepfakes? How do we deal with this consent that is now where your imagination is able to be made into an image? Have you thought at all about this, or do you have any sort of insight?
Yeah, firstly, all of these conversations are cancer because it's all like devolved into like don't rape and don't be misogynistic. And like that's it. Nobody's like really having an in-depth conversation about anything. something that I like to look at is I use two terms. I use sexualization and I use objectification. So sexualizing is when you view something as like sexual. That could be like masturbating to it. It could be imagining something, whatever the fuck. I don't think there's any problem with doing that to anybody. Knock yourself about sexualizing as much as you want. I don't think that's a problem. Objectification occurs, in my mind, objectification occurs when you make your sexualization of somebody their problem. So if I see a hot girl at the gym, I'm like, damn, she's fucking hot. I like that. Like, that's fine. But if I walk up to her and I start like hitting on her or being really obnoxious, well, that's not okay because I've gone from sexualizing her to treating her like a sexual object. I'm like objectifying her. So I think sexualizing anybody you want is okay. Just don't like be creepy or weird about it. Don't like make them aware of it. Don't make it their problem and don't act on that in a way that the other person wouldn't want you to.
So there's a thread of online red pill that says that creepy is a sexual advance that is just from a man who is undesirable. So like how do if that is the case, which maybe you don't think it is, is there better or more actionable advice than don't be creepy for those guys who don't know how to engage without triggering that creepy response?
Yeah, this is something I'm working on. Come back to me in like fucking in June and I'll have like a better answer to this. But I need to. The problem is. I'm pretty sure you probably develop a lot of your socialization skills probably by the time you're like 14 or 15. And then you kind of like iterate and refine on them going through high school and college. But like if you're getting a guy that's like 22 and they're asking you like, how do I not be creepy? Like, I don't know. Like I can tell, I think if you're a socially adept person, you can tell immediately if it's creepy or not, right? If I go up to a girl and I say a couple things and she kind of like glances to the side or she's got like the laser vision where she's just like looking on her phone and not talking to me, like I immediately like, okay, this person does not want to talk to me. Like I'm cringing at myself and you walk away. But I've seen other guys that will lean into those conversations so hard and it's like, bro, do you not see how fucking awkward this is right now? It's hard to coach somebody on like how to not be creepy. I feel like there is there's a bubble of awareness that you can have about how other people think or feel. And if you have that, it helps you socially. And if you haven't developed that, you're going to be lost at sea. Like I can tell pretty reasonably, like how good of a time is the person I'm with having right now? How do they feel about me? How do they feel about themselves? How do they feel about the night? This conversation I'm having, this stranger at the gym. Like I have a pretty good intuitive sense of like how they feel. I can talk about their body language towards me. Are they receptive? Are they laughing? Are they making eye contact? Or are they kind of like cutting me off? Are they being like very short, very curt, kind of like looking at their phone the whole time, not making eye contact, trying to like move around, right? Versus somebody that's like trying to stay in your butt. Like but I can't give you like a list of these. Like here's like 15 sites, right? It's just like a developed intuitive sense of like being around other bodies and being around other people and kind of figuring out like this person likes me, this person probably doesn't like me very much. I don't know how to sell that to somebody in like a 2-minute blurb of like, this is how you learn how to not be creepy.
You're making me realize. I mean, so I've got this channel, Charisma on Command. I did coaching. It started related to dating.
Okay, yeah.
And no, so I mean, you're actually just. I realized that I actually had that highly developed. It was hair trigger sensitive to the degree where I was so shy. You know what I mean? Because I was always, I creeped him. Like I didn't want to talk to anybody because there was that fear. And the people who I was able to help were people like me who came with perhaps an oversensitive. You know, and it's like, look, you can hang in there a little bit longer. You could say hi. Like they're not immediately wanting to get rid of you. The people that I struggled with were the people that you're describing who did not have that and would just creep people out. And I did not know how to communicate to them. You got to get out of there. Like this is not going well. You are bothering this person, and it made me change the business and change who we focused on because I found that. What you're describing, if you did not come with some sort of intuitive sense, some baseline intuitive sense, and we were instead working on shyness and overcoming that and being more confident, it was impossible for me, at least, to help you. And I don't have the answer to for some of those guys who have been left behind, which I think is a shame because we, like you said, we can't leave people behind just the same way we can't leave the homeless people. You leave this huge cohort of guys behind, or even a small cohort, it becomes a problem.
There are things that we do that become automated processes, and we don't realize how complicated they are. Like walking is an incredibly complicated interaction between so many different, your proprioception of where your limbs are, the balance that exists inside your inner ear, all of these different muscle groups that are coordinating. It's like walking is you're not actually dragging anything. You're falling forward and catching yourself while lifting your back foot at the same time, and you're doing all of this. If you were to try to explain to somebody like how to walk, it's actually incredibly complicated. It wouldn't surprise me if there's more than like 60 or 70 different muscles from your toes to your shoulders in terms of like how do you actually walk. So like you either learn to walk and you do it and you coordinate all of it, or you can't. And then trying to explain that from the ground up is so complicated. And yeah, I want to think about this more because I don't like that I don't have a good answer, because the red pill guys will talk all day about, like, oh, you need to do this and blah. And it's like, bullshit. I don't think that works. But if I don't have an answer, I mean, why would you listen to me on it? Yeah, I don't know. I'll try to figure this out more, but I don't have a good answer. I just know that when I'm talking to people, I'm never thinking like, okay, I need to ask these 4 questions. I need to make sure that I maintain enough eye contact, but not too much that it's creepy. I need to laugh and touch your shoulder. I'm never thinking of that. All of it is like incredibly intuitive to where like, if you ask me like, how does this person feel? Like, oh, I think she's having a really good time. She likes my jokes. I'm paying attention. I've asked her really interesting questions. Like I just have like a back and forth that I feel very intuitively. And yeah, that's not sad. That's a shitty answer to anybody. Oh, you just got to feel it out, dude. Be yourself. Like that doesn't work, because if that worked, obviously they wouldn't be coming to you for fucking advice.
Well, what I was luckily able to do, I mean, you're like, I never thought of that. I was like, oh shit, I fucking did. That was I wasn't that in my head, but what I was able to do was I think I had a baseline of intuitive human understanding, but it was underdeveloped, and I had to think of one thing that I was going to do in conversation. It could only be one thing. If it ever became more than like, hey, I'm going to do this, and then it became totally robotic and you lost that connection. But in terms of just moving one thing at a time, which is, I don't know, you're making shitty eye contact, like stop looking at your feet, or like make sure to stay in conversation with that barista or that Uber driver for one sentence longer than you feel comfortable for, because otherwise you'll just run away at the first sign of silence in a conversation. Like those little things over time worked very well for me, and I think they work well for our audience. But yeah, I have not been able to do the person that was starting from like, I don't get it at all. I cannot feel what's going on here.
Yeah, what you're saying, I mean, sounds like how you would train any skill. That sounds correct. You're not going to take a creep and turn them into a fucking suave, seduction artist one time. It's going to be with like, take a small fucking thing, and then like ingrain that so deep into yourself that you don't have to think about that thing anymore. And then we'll give you like another strategy, right? Yeah. Stop talking so fucking much in a conversation and let the other person answer a question, right? Don't try to cut them off. Like focus on that for like 3 conversations. And then the next one, practice complimenting something that's not creepy, right? Compliment something that somebody put effort into, not a body feature, right? So like your hair looks really nice is a lot different than like you have nice eyes, right? Or your dresses are like cheat codes for women. Anytime a woman wears a dress, you can always say, oh my God, that's such a cute dress. And every woman will like it no matter what, because they don't usually wear dresses, like stuff like that. Yeah. Building like little things like that into your repertoire, and then practice them until they become second nature. So you don't have to think about them, because I would imagine at this point, or I could be wrong, but I'm guessing that when you talk to people, you're probably not going through all these checklists now, because you already did all that. And now it's just kind of like part of how you interact with somebody, right?
Yes. And now it truly is, it is the cliche advice of be yourself is what I tell myself most often.
But like that's because you've crafted yourself.
Exactly. And it's for whom am I giving advice? And it's like, because be yourself is the most obnoxious, shitty advice that you can offer to someone who is really struggling.
Exactly. Yeah.
But it's also the most deeply true. And so I feel like, I have tried, I will not take down the old videos, even though I might not give some of the same advice now, because I recognize that they are for a certain person at a certain time in their life. Though if you ask me today, I'm likely to say, take deep breaths, sit quietly with yourself, see if you can still your mind and be, but that's just not useful to somebody at the beginning of their journey.
Sure.
So you mentioned Red Pill. I mentioned Red Pill a couple of times. Would love to just touch on this. One of the things a big moment that I enjoyed from your fresh and fit conversation with the guys was the 40%,
Girl in Kansas City. It's like getting flown out to Dubai.
Yes, she is, bro.
No.
Nigga, today.
You guys are wild.
I guarantee you somebody get flown tonight.
You're coping, man.
Hold on, I just want to hear, for the record, for you 3 to answer this, what percentage of college women do you think are being flown around the world? I want to hear from all 3 of you.
If I have to argue,
I want to hear.
Off of like probability-wise, if I argue, maybe like 30, 40, 50.
Holy shit.
That's a high number. That's a high number.
Let him answer.
So I can answer this question properly. Does she live on campus and she's a college student?
Yeah.
Then she's going to go ahead and settle for the top guys on her college campus.
Okay, so geography class. So the thing I said earlier. What if she's staying at home? Yeah, I said that people tend to date and within their
But you got to remember, a typical university is going to have kids from all over the country.
Okay, say it's a state school in Iowa. Are those girls getting flown to Dubai?
Off season, they can be.
Okay, 30, 40%. Is that what you said?
Well, globally speaking, but I'm just saying, like, for example,
you understand that's the actual number is like less than 0.1%, right?
Of girls getting flown out?
Of girls getting flown out to guys from normal
Very
girls.
little.
Very little.
It's very little. I'm from Vegas and now in Miami and I've never done that.
Have you ever been flown out?
Motherfuckers
No.
You've never been flown out?
No.
Listen, man, dude, my subreddit made so many memes. There were pictures of like 50 planes like taking off from whenever it was like spring break, all the women flying to Dubai or whatever.
So it was you asked one of the hosts whose name I don't know.
Fresh.
You were talking about how many women are paid to go take boat trips with these men, and you're like, how many women from college?
What
or
percentage of women?
What percentage?
What percentage of college girls are being flown out to Dubai? Yeah.
And he said 40%. And it was just like, oh my God, how do we continue this conversation at this point, given that we live in different worlds? It actually caused me to reflect. What I realized is that people enforce a selection bias onto those that they interact with. People that won't tolerate them get the fuck out of there. And, you go to a Miami club, perhaps it feels like, and maybe is true, that 40% of the women there have been on a boat at some point. So I think to his experience, that number is far closer, even though it is not representative of women in general of that age group in the United States of America. And one of the things I think that this is, I guess, what a rabbit hole is when you fall so deeply into a group of people, whether it's Miami club girls or Croatia Yacht Week girls or whatever, that you start making generalizations about women based on what seems to be the way that type of person operates. And that seems like what so much of the red pill is about. They're always looking to trade up. They're always looking to do this. And I have had some of those beliefs in myself busted as I have become a different person and allowed and attracted different types of women into my life that wouldn't be caught at that club, that wouldn't cheat on their boyfriend with a superstar athlete, that, whatever, for religious reasons or just personal shame or just not being interested. And it's unfortunate because I understand and have been adjacent to that world, how believable that shit is when you are deeply ensconced and involved in it, and how someone who comes from the outside is like, that's not true. It's like, well, that guy has never been to the club. He doesn't get it. He hasn't had sex with the women that I've had sex with because they are all like this. So yeah, I mean, I had a lot of reactions in watching that. That was just one.
It's incredibly important to ask those gauging questions. I try to do this now with everybody that I talk to because it gives me a good sense of where you're at. And if you've on an intellectual level, it'll tell me like, have you actually studied any of this topic? And then on an emotional level, it tells me how bought in you are to a particular thing. So how much work do I have to do? I thought it was incredibly telling that so earlier I gave the example of like a really strong BLM supporter asking them, how many unarmed black men a year do you think are killed by the cops? And hearing them say like thousands, probably thousands, 5,000, 6,000, or whatever. It's like, okay, you're 2 orders of magnitude off. We're so unbelievably wrong on this. And I understand why you feel the way, because like if 10,000 black men were dying every year to the police officers, that would be crazy. That would be insane. You should be that mad. When Matt Walsh was asked on Joe Rogan, how many children are going through, it was either trans surgeries or just taking like trans drugs. How many children, how many minors in the United States is affecting? His answer was millions.
Is done.
Depends on what. I don't think we have exact numbers, but if we're talking about the drugs, millions.
How many people have had this done?
Depends on what. I don't think we have exact numbers, but if we're talking about the drugs, millions.
Millions? How did you do a whole documentary on this and you're like 4 orders of magnitude off? Millions of kids on puberty blockers? Millions?
You're talking about hormone blockers?
Yeah.
Millions of kids have been on hormone blockers? Really?
I'm sure someone's going to fact check me on that, but my guess is that we're into the millions now at this point. Yeah.
You know what? I actually am glad he said that. That is your guess. That truly shows what your state of mind is and how disconnected you are from reality, if that's what you feel, right? I like asking engaging questions like what is the percentage of people that you think are this? And somebody's like, 98% of people probably feel this way. And it's like, okay, well, we looked at the data and it's actually like 12%. I think you're a little bit disconnected, buddy. Millions of children on puberty blockers?
It's a very small number, if that's right.
It says over the last 5 years, there were at least 4,780 adolescents who started puberty blockers and had a prior gender dysphoria diagnosis.
This says it's kind of undercounted, but that
would be a big undercounting.
Less than 1,000 people a year.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I would guess, hundreds of thousands at this, but I could be wrong.
You did a whole documentary on this, didn't you? How do you not have any background information at all about any of this? Did you do any reading, any research, anything at all?
Million sounds great.
Yeah, I could be wrong.
Yeah.
The Media Matters will have fun with that clip.
Yeah.
Matt Walsh claims it was.
And I think Joe Rogan looked up in the show, and the answer was it was 5,000 over the past 8 years.
Wow.
It was, who's that? 4 orders of magnitude off, and it's how if your worldview is so warped that that warped worldview is going to start to inform so many other opinions you have, that if you can't go to the root of that and readjust how you view the world, you're going to be completely lost when it comes to talking about almost any topic.
Mm-hmm. And Red Pill or Matt Walsh or whatever, those or cops, it says more about you, not in a good or a bad way, than it does about the world in general when you start to believe those things that are verifiably so disconnected from what the average population says. It tells you more about how you're selecting for that. Matt Walsh, you are hanging out in communities where this is the most important thing and needs to be viewed every day. Same thing with you're looking at the Red Pill guys or whatever. You're hanging out in a group of girls for whom this is true, and this tells me so much more about you than it does about women. Mm-hmm. And I think that is, one of the things that I get frustrated with Red Pill is that there's this general idea that, and I understand the underpinning behind it and have at times, leaned on it in arguments, which is men are rational, women are emotional. Mm-hmm. But the basic underpinning of Red Pill is an obsession with if women like you, which seems like the most irrational way to do, to take these irrational creatures that you do not need to survive or whatever, and make your career, your hobby, your conversational topic, how to get more of them to be more interested in you seems so deeply irrational, but is not explored in the Red Pill community. Yeah, so I just have my own frustrations in watching this, and I thought that you comported yourself well in those conversations, given some of the difficulties. Did you with the Sneako stuff? I wanted to ask. It seemed like. Sneako is a content creator who was canceled, I think, recently, right? He got sort of shut down for some of the stuff that he said.
Wiped off the internet, yeah.
And I was familiar with his content 2 years ago, whatever, enjoyed watching it from time to time. And it seems that this being shut out of, or pushed away, I suppose, from the mainstream view of things, from being sincerely, privately, and personally attacked by these companies that are shutting him down, has moved his perspective way farther in connection with those other canceled groups of people. So he hung out with Kanye West, he's with Andrew Tate. And it seems like this culture of shutting people out of the conversation so that they just go away has the same effect that repressing a memory does, which is you think that it's gone, you think it's gone away, but really it's just fomenting underneath the surface, pissed off, angry, and more scheming and trying to get back in, and more dangerous than it was in the first place. Do you see it unfolding like that? How do you feel about these cancellations that are occurring? Do they work? Don't they work?
Yeah, I don't think you can cancel ideas. I think you can get rid of people, but I think if the underlying conditions that made that person popular are still there, you're probably still going to have that strain of thought. You have to be able to figure out why. Andrew Tate is kind of a deplorable guy, in my opinion. There are a lot of people looking to him as a role model. You need to figure out why. What's going on? Something is broken in your system if you can't get people to follow you over a guy like that. Something is going on there. And then the cancellation.
What do you think is going on there, by the way? Because I'm curious if you have a theory on that.
Yeah, I think people on the left are they do a really bad job at attacking majority groups and just making them feel like shit over and over and over again. All men are rapists. White people, whites, we need the white genocide. We need the Mayo side. We need to, champion minorities, and everything is about slavery and everything is about white people are horrible, blah, 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 blah. If you repeat this type of rhetoric over and over again, at some point, white people and men, they're not gods. They're going to start to feel pretty shitty. Okay, well, if you're just going to, chastise us and castigate us and, demonize us constantly, well, we're going to listen to somebody that doesn't. And I think that's kind of what happened. I think the left felt like they didn't need to provide good role models or good leadership for majority groups. So they started to look towards other people that tend to be on the right. Yeah.
It seems like also with Andrew Tate, you know, one of the things that pisses me off is like Andrew Tate, who got famous for his misogyny. Like, I think what Andrew Tate got famous for is that people are not teaching young men how to relate to girls in a way that they're satisfied with. And even though it's some of the stuff I certainly disagree with, I mean, I relate to this as when I was growing up. Like, I did not know how to get women to be attracted to me. And then I encountered, you know, the early underpinnings of Red Pill, which was the game or whatever. And you get this line, and I will not forget the first time that I was in a bar. You know, we was 20 years old in London, didn't know what to say, used a line from the game, and we got smiles. And I was like, holy shit, this is it. This is the truth in the Bible. And I was willing for a period, though I think I quickly corrected it, to accept much more wholesale whatever it said, because it had busted open my worldview and provided me something that worked. And I feel like that might be going on with Andrew Tate as well, where he tells you some of the things you could do with girls, ways to be confident, whatever. One of those works with a girl in your class or your school or your workplace or whatever. And you're way willing to go, well, fuck, nobody taught me this for the last 18 years. I'm going to let all of this in because you guys didn't give me this. You guys gave me, when I grew up, it was Can't Hardly Wait, where what you had to do was write a note about the girl that you love, let her find it. She would discover that you'd been stalking her for 4 years and fall deeply in love with you. It was just like, do you remember that movie or any of those like that? Like,
nope.
Okay, there were these tropes in these movies where what the Jennifer Love Hewitt loved was the creepy guy who stalked her and had like a diorama and pictures of her that she would uncover at the end of the second act, the beginning of the third act.
Oh, sure. I mean, I've seen
realized
like
that he
the
was
Notebook,
stalking her.
right?
Yeah, realized that he was stalking her, and that was love. You know,
like I wrote one letter a day for a whole year. It's like,
bro, get over it. So yeah, that it's not the advice that young men are getting, the way that they're learning to relate, for a lot of them is just not working. And that's where I see Andrew Tate having a real foothold, is that his stuff works for men in a way that what they're getting isn't.
Yeah, I think that that's a subsection of a larger thing, which is a refusal to acknowledge reality sometimes. Like, people on the right will say things like, men and women are different. And people on the left are like, no, they're exactly the same. And it's like, we all have similar experiences with moms and dads. We all have similar experiences with brothers and sisters. And we all can very clearly see at a very early age that boys and girls and young women and young men and women seem to function pretty differently. And I think a lot of people on the left are so obsessed with like the systemic analyses and they're trying to not come off as like, trying to be very woke, not coming off as racist, not coming off as sex, whatever. They don't want to acknowledge any difference in anything ever. And when people on the right are willing to make that acknowledgement, yeah, I think similar to how somebody gives you a piece of advice you've never heard before that works, when somebody makes an analysis of the world that is true and someone else seems to be delusional, you're like, okay, well, if you're going to say this crazy stuff, I'm not going to listen to you at all because you don't seem like you want to acknowledge reality, you know?